Welcome, this is Pam. Today we're going to be talking about how parasitic worms suppress our immune system and make us more susceptible to other infections, other parasites like Lyme disease or even malaria, babesia, and many other smaller parasites. If we haven't met, my name is Pam Bartha. I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. And I am really excited to spend this time chatting with you about this topic because it really helps us to understand why we get so sick, why some of us come down with Lyme disease and others don't, why some of us have babesia, Bartonella, other different types chronic fungal infections while other people don't. And this is really, really important. And the research that I'm sharing with you really comes out of Africa, where they actually treat parasites, where they actually recognize that people have parasites. And yes, we have parasites in the developed countries, absolutely. So it's really important to know that. When you go to your doctor, I actually spoke with a couple of healthcare professionals in our hometown and just kind of was trying to give them some information. And one of them, the younger doctor, was really open, and the older doctor, the one that's more senior, was really not interested in what I was sharing. Like he's like, "Oh, parasites are all around us, and we don't really have parasite problems in Canada." Like he was from India, and he's like, "In India we have parasite problems, but in Canada we really don't have parasite problems." And I'm like, "Oh man!" And then he also said with multiple sclerosis that you get as you age, you're actually the MS becomes less of a problem. And I'm just like, I don't know, because the research shows that if we have multiple sclerosis, then over time it turns from relapsing remitting to progressive, which is a much more serious, like debilitating form of multiple sclerosis. So, and it's really sad because, he's one of the experts. And like that's another reason why it's really helped. I'm going to share my story and how this really helps me to make sense of how I ended up coming down with multiple sclerosis, and maybe it will help you also. And that's my goal, is to help you. And at the end, I'm going to share some amazing updates from our students, the wellness champions. It's truly miraculous watching them on this journey as they are recovering from parasitic infections, parasitic infestations that cause all kinds of chronic diseases, multiple sclerosis, and others. And I apologize for not being here last week. For some reason, my internet was down for hours, which normally doesn't happen. And so it's really hard to live stream if you're hotspotting it on your phone. So that doesn't work as well for live streaming. So again, this topic is really, really important. The research, the understanding is coming more from countries like Africa, where they have more experience in treating parasites. They recognize parasites. And before I carry on, I just wanted to share too that they're like, well, MS isn't really common in countries like Africa, and that's where they have all the parasites. So it couldn't be a parasitic problem that could cause MS, because we don't have parasites in developed countries and we have more MS. The truth of the matter is that we have parasites all over the world. Yes, we may sterilize our water better. We might deal with our garbage better. The sanitation might be a little better, but sometimes the chlorinators don't work with the water. But there's still parasites in our soil, in our pets, on our produce, the vegetables and fruits we get in. Eating in a restaurant, somebody's preparing your food and they don't wash the produce, or they don't wash their hands after going to the bathroom. So let's just settle that right here and now, that parasites are in every country. If you actually start doing some digging and look at the CDC of your country in the United States or Canada or other, you'll see that they say, yeah, there are different types of soil transmitted worms. We have all kinds of different, Borrelia, babesia, many different types of parasites in developed countries. All right. And so that is really important to understand. And parasites cause disease. That's another fact. Parasites cause disease. Parasites are not good for us. The reason that they're parasites is that they live in us and they cause us harm. They really cause our immune system to work hard, and that's the inflammation part. They produce a lot of poisons. They actually suppress our immune system. They have many different ways that they can make themselves blind to our immune system so that our immune system doesn't go after them, because you might wonder, well, why do I have parasites? But with how they are suppressing our immune system so that our immune system allows them to live in us, and then also when we, let's say, get bitten by a mosquito or sometimes by a tick, but not only by ticks, by vector, some kind of biting insect. There's many different small parasites that will travel through mosquitoes, spiders, horse flies, and ticks. And then if our microbiome is in balance enough that our immune system is not suppressed and it's not struggling, then our immune system is going to deal with those secondary parasites that we are exposed to. But if our immune system is really struggling with worms like roundworms, tapeworms, intestinal flukes, then our immune system is more suppressed. And then also, it's not just going to be only the other parasites, but there's many factors. It's like, are we sleep deprived? Are we eating a ton of processed carbohydrates? Are we under a lot of stress? So all of the environmental factors, plus the dysbiosis, the parasites, the worms inside of us, will cause our immune system not to deal with this secondary parasitic exposure. It could even be like swimmer's itch, like if you go into the lake and you get this schistosomiasis, these blood flukes that would be passed from, they're usually in lakes where there's ducks, and they kind of cycle around with ducks, but they can get into humans too. So if you have a very robust immune system, your microbiome is in balance, your immune system isn't struggling, it'll be able to clear those out. But if you have any type of, dysbiosis, your immune system is compromised, and maybe your lifestyle isn't the best, then some of those blood flukes, they will get past your immune system and they will start to establish themselves in your body. So it's not just the protozoa, but we have been talking a lot about malaria and Lyme disease and other small parasites, and they definitely are going to be more of a problem. Even bacterial infections are going to be more of a problem if our immune system is really struggling with different types of worms. And it's not just roundworms, but it can also be flukes and tapeworms. So it's really important too that we talk about like how over the last few years, there have been a few studies with multiple sclerosis, and they're like giving MS patients worms. So there's some studies with the whipworm and the hookworm, and I'll talk a little bit about those studies, but it's really important to clear the air that it is not a good thing to be infected with parasites, because they're doing that because they know that these parasitic worms produce different substances that suppress our immune system so that our immune system will allow them to live inside of us. And because the standard of care treatments right now are all immunosuppressive, not just for multiple sclerosis, but for like most autoimmune diseases, they're all targeting our immune system. So like these companies are always looking for new patentable products to suppress the immune system. The reason they like immunosuppressive drugs is something that you have to take for the rest of your life. It's a really good business, right? You've got a product you can sell to somebody for the rest of their life as long as their body can handle it. And that is what they are. They're called maintenance pharmaceuticals, the disease-modifying maintenance, but they all suppress the immune system. So that's why they're like, oh, well, worms suppress your immune system. Maybe we could figure out which substances they use to suppress your immune system, and then we could come up with some new drugs that we can patent and we can make a good income off of, right? And that's not what we want. When we're diagnosed with any kind of chronic disease, we want a cure. We don't want to live on a drug for the rest of our life. We don't want to have a continual decrease in the quality of life, like more and more disability over the years. We want a cure if at all possible. And it is absolutely possible, but you got to treat the cause. And so we have to recognize the cause. So hopefully that helps you to understand that I personally, in my humble experience working with students, all the research I've done is that there is no benefit to taking in parasitic worms into your body to suppress your immune system further, that is not a smart idea. That is not a good idea. So that's really a misconception, but it is, again, looking for new products, looking for new patentable products. So just to be clear, parasites are microorganisms. We're just going to talk about living parasites. Not like viruses can be parasitic also, but they're not living. They're not going to eat your food. They use us to reproduce, but they're not living. So the parasites we're talking about would be worms and protozoa and bacteria and fungi, and they live inside of us and they cause us harm. They eat our food. They make us deficient in certain nutrients. They produce substances that really make the immune system, and also their presence, the immune system is fighting, and that's the inflammation. Think about inflammation is war. Your immune system is fighting something, and it's usually infections when you're dealing with disease. If you have an accident, that's a different type of injury, right? But a lot of the injury comes from these infections. So our immune system is not attacking our tissue for no reason. It is not an autoimmune disease. It is the immune system is fighting something, and there's inflammation involved. And it's the primary job of our immune system is to fight infections, to fight parasites. So they do produce a lot of different substances that are inflammatory, but also immune suppressive. And that's what the topic of today is. So in Africa, in some of the studies I looked at, like malaria is a big deal there, and they want to eradicate malaria. And what they've discovered is that if they treat people at the same time, like, or even just treating them for these soil transmitted worms, so like giving them things like albendazole and ivermectin. So when they're treating the worms, and that makes it so that people are less susceptible to coming down with malaria. And that all makes sense. I shared with you. If your microbiome is in balance well enough, then if you get bitten by a mosquito, you are not necessarily going to have a really bad case of the parasites that they carry, or maybe your immune system will clear it. All right, so I'm just going to go back here. So make sure to type your questions in the question box, because I'm going to go back to them and answer your questions at the end. But what the research shows us is that, as I mentioned, the substances that the worms produce, so they excrete it or they secrete different substances, and they can be different types of proteins and all kinds of other substances that directly suppress our immune system. And so if we have a chronic worm infection, then our immune system will not respond to the other parasites that we're exposed to. And this is kind of a little bit like the chicken and the egg, right? It's like when I was young, I was on a lot of antibiotics. That was a time, I'd say in the 60s, where the doctors would tell my mom that, if your kids get a fever, like be really careful, because if it's strep, it's going to wreck their heart. So antibiotics are really important. So every time we had a fever, we were on antibiotics. So I was on a lot of antibiotics as a young child. I was always skinny. I always had stomach aches. I lived on a farm. So when you're on a lot of antibiotics, it really decreases your natural defense, those health promoting microbes that really protect you from parasites, make your immune system. They have all kinds of health promoting properties. And I talk about that in my masterclass. So I was like a sitting duck. I had like wide open spaces for parasites to just become established in my digestive tract. I lived on a farm. We had every type of animal. I was outside in the dirt all the time. So early on, before the age of 10 even, I'm sure that I had these parasitic worms. I don't know that I would have had babesia back then or malaria. That, I'm sure that it was going around, but I didn't have any neurological symptoms, right? I had just gut issues and I had constipation, and that was when I was younger. And then when I was older, like teens, I had a lot of acne. So then I was put on tetracycline for months, which is a really broad spectrum antibiotic that further devastates your healthy ecosystem, all the health promoting microbes. So I was really like not in good shape with my microbiome. And then I went to Africa. We went to Spain and Africa. It was a high school trip with a bunch of high school students and teachers. It was really fun. And whether I was bitten by a mosquito out there that had malaria or not, I don't know. I know that in Canada, we do have a lot of MS in people that have not gone to any kind of country that has malaria. So that may not have been, or it might have been, because malaria was a problem in the country that I went to in Africa when I was probably like 17, 18 years old. And then when I was in my early 20s, I started having children. And with the second child, I noticed, even in the pregnancy, that when I would bend my neck down, I get this little tingling. So I had no MS diagnosis, but that was the first sign. And that was during pregnancy. And the doctor's like, oh, well, we'll keep an eye on it. I was quite fatigued, 2 young children under the age of 2. But I just thought that was normal. I was pretty healthy. I was eating fairly healthy, a little bit too much sugar, though I did crave ice cream when I was pregnant, so probably ate quite a bit of sugar. I know that I love chocolate too. Back then, had chocolate in the fridge and ate it every day, but I wasn't like a binger. But then when my second child, was 6 months old, that's when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I was very sleep deprived because I had insomnia, like as a mom. Like a lot of times you're up, but it just, the infections I had really triggered the insomnia bad. And so I ended up losing all vision in my left eye. It was like a black patch over my eye for like within 3 days. So I was rushed to like an eye specialist first, then I was rushed to a university MS hospital clinic, and I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. When I had my children, and I specifically remember with my third child, because I did wait 8 years and I had another child, because I was able to, like, just with the little that I learned about these infections with MS, I was able to put it in remission pretty quickly. But I noticed these little spots all over my torso. And that is another symptom of babesia. And so I've gone through a lot of, like, several different articles, blog posts on MS and babesia. And I also talked about MS and being a vascular disease. Like, it's so fascinating when you put all of this together. I'm sure that one of the parasites I was dealing with was a babesia or malaria. We don't know yet if it's more one or the other, or always one or the other, or maybe even a different protist that is similar. Maybe it's a different protozoa that infects red blood cells. Could be a different species. I don't know. But that in time we're going to learn more about. But with all the symptoms I had a lot of also symptoms of babesia coming on later. I went to different workshops where I connect with different healthcare professionals, and they have these machines that they can do energy testing, and they picked up babesia in me. So I had a lot of symptoms, and then my blood work has always been off. So this is something you can check also. If you look at your basic blood work from a doctor, a comprehensive panel, they'll measure that your red blood cell count, the width of your red blood cells, and there's also like how big they are. So there's MCV, MCHC, etc. So and your platelets. So if those kind of parameters are off a bit, like, it doesn't have to be like dangerously off, but if they're off, that's another sign that your red blood cells are being affected. And it's usually a parasite that will be affecting that. Anemia, again, would be another one. So when you look at your blood work and you look at your symptoms and then maybe some energy test results, and then you look at the history of the research that I've shared with you, you'll see that this is really, really common. And then it's like, well, why? I'm the oldest of 6 kids. Why did I end up with MS and my other siblings didn't? And number one, they were never on tetracycline for months for acne. I was the only one. That's one factor that I believe was a big factor. We were probably all exposed to similar parasites. I do know that 2 of my brothers had their tonsils removed, so they would have been on some antibiotics, but there was just, so we probably all have some parasitic worms from growing up on the farm, being on too many antibiotics. But there's something about like MS or other neurological diseases where we're having those neurological symptoms. And it looks like, of course, Borrelia that causes Lyme disease could be one of the problems too, right? And there's a few, Bartonella, Ehrlichia, and several others. But I think that from the research I've done is that babesia is like Borrelia is maybe more common, but Babesia would be the second most common of the vector-borne infections. It's really quite common, and it has very characteristic symptoms. Like, I'm going off on a tangent. I'm sure that I've done a talk on Babesia. You can go look at that later. It's on our website. You can just do a Google search of Live Disease Free and Babesia, and you'll find a direct link to our blog post. But the way, like, going back to our topic here, I'll just share a couple of symptoms that are really characteristic of Babesia, like air hunger, where you walk up the stairs and you're winded. You're walking up a hill and you're winded, and you shouldn't be. You know that you should not be struggling to get air. Maybe you're dealing with a lot of anxiety or depression, just feeling like so sad, or else like the anxiety. Some people have just severe anxiety. That's another really big one. And extreme fatigue is another one. It can affect like a headache type. It's not like a really like what I've had in the past. It's called a migraine. It's kind of a global headache, but it's not like one that necessarily puts you down on the couch, but just you've kind of got this chronic low grade headache. Tinnitus is another one. Flickering vision, visual disturbances, night sweats. That's a big one. Day sweats, nights, but especially the night sweats. So the night sweats and the air hunger are like two, and also being off balance. So like where you don't have full vertigo, but you just feel tippy. You feel like you're just off balance. So those are some big signs for Babesia. And of course, there's overlap with different parasites, but if you have a lot of those, and then those little like they look like little blood blisters on your torso. That's another one. So those would be some common symptoms. So, and the reason I talk about Babesia is because we've talked about malaria, and we're going to talk about that here. But malaria is treated very similarly to, or Babesia is treated very similarly to malaria. So they haven't done a ton of research, not years and years of research on Babesia, but both malaria and Babesia are both protozoa that infect our red blood cells, so they would cause very similar issues, and that's why they're responding quite well to the similar drugs. Like treating Babesia would be the same type of drugs that they're using as treating malaria. So we know that worms, they can really suppress our immune system, and for those of you that are science buffs, they really induce the regulatory T cells and the Th2 type cells. So you don't have to worry about it, but some people wanted to know, like how is it affecting our immune system? However, secreted or excreted parasite substances and also proteins and extracellular vesicles, so little tiny sacs that contain substances, or a combination of them, can all affect our immune function, can all suppress the immune system. So these are different ways that worms suppress our immune system. And so in the scientific literature, it says that these soil transmitted worm parasites, they make us more susceptible to, they're called standby or bystander pathogens, so other microbes that can make us sick. So if our immune system was not dealing with so much, then we probably wouldn't get Lyme disease, and we probably wouldn't get Babesia. So that's the problem too with Babesia and with Lyme, is that, some people get really, really serious cases. Some people are asymptomatic and they still have some of these parasites in their body, and some have mild versions. So it's not like everybody gets this really strong acute infection of these smaller parasites. And that, again, it's multifaceted. It's what is your microbiome like? What is your lifestyle like? What is your environment like? All of these factors greatly impact you. And so there was one study. I'll just quickly share a couple of studies. So a 2020 study where they gave hookworm treatment for relapsing remitting MS. Again, they didn't find any significant improvements in that study giving people hookworms, MS patients. It just breaks my heart that they're doing this. And the sad thing is that there are some really big influencers in the the MS community that are actually talking about how parasites are helpful for MS. But I don't know that they ever read the studies, because the studies have showed that there's no real significant benefit to taking these worms. But what are the adverse effects of hookworms? Skin rash, fever, coughing or wheezing, loss of appetite, stomach pain, and diarrhea, weight loss, and anemia. Those are just some of the symptoms of hookworms. And of course, if you've just infected somebody with hookworms, they might not have all of those symptoms. But as they become more populated and more established in the body, then yes, we have a greater number of these awful symptoms. And then there was another study in 2021 where they gave MS patients the pig whipworm. Sounds really disgusting. And again, their conclusions was like there was a really great degree of variability with how patients responded, and they really didn't find any truly significant impact for multiple sclerosis. So these poor people have these worms in them, and hopefully they can get them out, because we know how challenging they are to treat. Again, if they're just doing these studies for like a year or not very long, like many of us have had these worms for years and they become really well established, and that's when they cause the symptoms. So for whipworm, the symptoms can include fatigue, abdominal pain, bloody diarrhea, anorexia, anemia, poor growth. So like malnourished, right? And stunted growth, dehydration, fecal incontinence during sleep. Isn't that lovely? Rectal prolapse, where the rectum comes out of the anus, awful, and just becoming emaciated, like skinny, losing weight. And we know that parasites cause disease. Why in heaven's name would we ever give people parasites? Like, again, it's literally to use us as this is my personal opinion, to use us as lab rats to try to find out which substances these worms are producing that are suppressing our immune system so that new drugs can be made. To me, this is just brutal. I'm sorry, it's just incredibly brutal. To me, it's criminal. I'll put that out there. It's just criminal. It's just awful. I can't believe, like, we're going to look back in 10, 20 years and we're going to say, what did we do to these poor people? Like, how was this okay to do this? Anyhow, so if we look at malaria and soil transmitted worms, or helminths, they call them helminths. So having an infection, so this is in science and studies, having an infection of these soil transmitted worms is associated with an increased risk of malaria. And again, Babesia would be the same, and I'm sure any other small parasite. So again, when you are immune suppressed from having a parasitic worm infection, you will be more susceptible to Lyme disease, to malaria, to all kinds of other fungal overgrowth and others. And then if you treat the worms, but you don't treat the malaria that is too populated in you because you had a disease like multiple sclerosis, then the malaria suppresses your lymphocytes, makes you more immunosuppressed too, and then you are more prone to having flares of other or relapses of other parasitic worms too. So they all must be treated. They all must be knocked back, and it doesn't always have to be with drugs. You can use different combinations. We'll talk about that at the end. So malaria and parasitic worms, they overlap in distribution, so where they're located, and research shows that worm infections may aid malaria transmission. So research shows that worm infections may aid malaria transmission. This is in science, all right? And again, malaria or Babesia or other small parasites. So malaria and soil transmitted worms, co-infection. So when we're having, like I had the worms plus the protists and fungi, etc., they can make anemia worse, especially in pregnant women, leading to worsened child development and also more adverse outcomes during pregnancy. So all of these would be worse when you have the combination of them versus if you just had worms or if you just had malaria. And so in the study that I'll be sharing all this research with you, like I always do on my blog post on livediseasefree.com at the end of this week. And so they were saying that, giving a mass drug administration, so giving a lot of people ivermectin to humans, it suppresses the transmission of malaria. So what I found really interesting is that ivermectin, when you're taking it, it actually has a mosquitocidal effect. It kills mosquitoes. So that's another reason too. But when they combine it with albendazole, that would maximize the effects. So it would be helping to kill a broader range of parrot worms that we would have. And also there will be also an effect on mosquitoes that they would die, which would definitely decrease the transmission of malaria. So I didn't know that about that it was had. I do know that ivermectin is definitely helpful against different ectoparasites, parasites outside the skin, but I didn't know that it had properties against mosquitoes. So researchers in the article stated that a proactive integrated control platform that targets malaria and these parasitic worms would be extremely cost effective, and it would reduce human suffering caused by multiple diseases, which is awesome. So there you have it. Like, these worms suppress your immune system, making you more susceptible to other parasites. It's kind of like whatever you're on antibiotics, you are exposed to parasites, whether it's through biting insects, whether it's through worms, but probably a lot of us do have worms. It's really, really common. And I think the difference between like myself and a family member who just has worms, where I had other infections that caused the neurological symptoms, would be that they just had maybe just more gut worms, like roundworms, for example, and I have had the Babesia. I probably haven't totally cleared it, but it's definitely reduced it a lot. And Babesia can make you very, very sick, just like malaria. So we don't know yet if it's going to be malaria that's more common that we realize, or if it is Babesia or again another protist. All right, so I'm going to just I'll answer a couple of questions first, and then I just wanted to share a few updates because I just had the most amazing call yesterday with the wellness champions that are recovering from these awful parasites. And it is just so incredibly humbling and so inspiring. I love these people. They are like the heroes. I call them the leaders, the trailblazers, the forward thinkers, because they get it. They know that what they're dealing with is parasites, and they, sometimes they don't have support of their family. They definitely don't have support of experts. Sometimes doctors are more open now, but they don't know how to help them. But definitely the neurologists usually are not that open to this. So it's a hard road, but we have a plan, we have a system, and they're recovering. And it's so incredibly exciting every week to get these updates from the students. So I'm going to go to a couple of different questions here. So somebody is asking about oxygen therapies. I can't say the name of it. Does that work for parasites? We use it in conjunction with parasite drugs and herbs and oxygen therapy. You can't just so the oxygen therapy will not reach, the one you're talking about and even ozone. You can use them very often. You can have them like bring oxygen into your blood. You can also do enemas. You can do rectal insufflations, but you can't reach the small intestine, and that's where a lot of the parasites are. You're not going to get a high enough concentration that crosses the blood-brain barrier. So, for example, if we do have a malaria babesia as one of the infections that infects our red blood cells, that causes these microbleeds, that causes lesions, etc., it's not the only parasite, but we'll just talk about that. Like, when you have a disease, you've had it for a long time. You've had these parasites for a year. So they're deep in your tissues, deep into the central nervous system. They're very prolific. They reproduce well. They're very happy. And so it's even just taking the parasite drugs is not a magic cure. Even just oxygen therapies by itself is not a magic cure. And herbs. You can start feeling better, but if you truly want to decrease their presence to the point where you feel like better than you can ever remember feeling, you have to use a combination of things that you can only go so far with oxygen therapies. You're not going to treat the central nervous system well enough. You're not going to treat the small intestines well enough. Same thing with herbs. The herbs are great. I wish we could just use herbs, but they're not going to treat the bigger parasites well enough. They're not going to get deep enough into the tissues at this point. They're helpful, but we have to really understand like which types of parasites we're dealing with and what are the best treatments for them. And it's always going to be a layering of therapies, not just using like one treatment or one type of treatment. So there's a copper revolution protocol that's helped with parasites. Awesome. That's great. We use many different things, and just be careful though with, I don't know what the copper revolution is, but there are certain treatments you can use that might use certain elements or certain metals that are maybe not as toxic. But I personally don't want to use anything where I'm introducing something into me that maybe down the road is going to be a problem, right? So if you end up with too much copper in you, I'm just guessing that that's what it is. It's just like colloidal silver. If I had nothing else and I had, a terrible infection, I might try colloidal silver. But if I don't need to use it, I'm not going to use it. Same thing with methylene blue. I know that it's approved by the government. But again, it's a dye that gets into your central nervous system, and very often it's contaminated with other metals. And if you don't need to use those things, use them if you absolutely have to, but you'll see that they're not a magic cure. So for this comment here, what I would say is that if you still have pain in your feet, that means that there's a parasite that has not been addressed well enough. And it could be that you're dealing with, because if you have MS, then it's very common, it's malaria babesia, and they're pretty challenging to treat. So very often artemisinin and wormwood is helpful, oxygen therapies are helpful, but sometimes we might need to include a malaria type drug, but you've got to work with a practitioner because they can affect your vision, they can affect your retina, but you may have to use that also. But if you still have pain, that means that you haven't addressed all of the parasites. And some of these metals might help, but again, be really careful because otherwise you're going to have to try to detox that. And some of them end up in the central nervous system, and then you have to try to get them out of the central nervous system, and that is just not a good thing. Is stress a factor of not being able to clear infection? Yes, absolutely. If you're under huge amounts of stress, that really affects your immune function also. And the parasites do respond to our stress hormones. We've seen that in our students all the time. It can make their neurological symptoms worse. So it's, sometimes we can't avoid stress. We have to just get through it. But you want to use practices that help you to manage the stress as best as you can. For me, the number one thing is prayer. The more stress is in my life, the longer I pray every morning. And I do it in the morning because otherwise my day just takes over my life. So I have to do it before I think about anything else. And but doing that investment in the morning, it brings over so much peace to me. It could be singing. Singing releases endorphins. It could be watching a funny movie and laughing. It could be talking to a friend that you just love and you have some good laughs. So laughing and singing, there's tapping, prayer, meditation, being out in nature. Like if I'm outside, and that's another thing that's been really health promoting for me for the last 2 or 3 years, is especially more, I would say this last year, being outside a lot more. So we have animals out here. I'm shoveling poop in the morning. I'm feeding the animals, and I'm just looking at nature and taking deep breaths and just the physical activity. So physical activity is another really good one that's going to help to, help to settle out the physiology in your body when you're under a lot of stress. So you intentionally have to do things to manage the stress, but diet is super important too, because if you decrease the carbs enough, you will notice that you can handle stress better. Your immune system improves a lot. When they travel into organs and muscles, can you clear them after spine surgery had Lyme, then parasites? You probably had other parasites before Lyme, because that's what we've seen in all of our students that have Lyme disease. The battle has been terrifying and tons of suffering. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yes, you can treat them if they are in the central nervous system or organ. But it requires more of the parasite drugs. The herbs are not going to get you to where you want to be. That's what we help people to do in the plan. If you don't have a doctor that doesn't know, like if you do not have a doctor that understands how to treat parasites, how to identify them, to recognize them, I should say. We can't identify them really well, but we can recognize them through symptoms, through energy testing, through health history, etc. But if you don't have support, make sure to reach out to us. You can watch my masterclass training. We have a system which students go through. They play an active role in their health recovery, and it's a really important skill to have, because you won't reach your health goals if you don't do that on your own. And most people don't figure this out on their own. So very important to learn the steps. So on my masterclass training, I share all the steps that we take to recover. And I'm really sorry that you've gone through that. It should be that we go to our doctor and we say, doctor, I've been having a hard time falling asleep. I have these crazy dreams. It seems like when there's a full moon, I seem to be having, these crazy dreams, and I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't fall back asleep, or I'm having brain fog, or I'm having some gas and constipation, or maybe I'm loose, just feeling more depressed. My mood is off. And then the doctor would say to you, oh, sounds like you're dealing with parasites. Let's figure out what you need, treat them, and then you're back to normal. And then you never end up with chronic disease. And this is why they don't want us to treat parasites, because if we did treat parasites, we would not have a multi-trillion-dollar healthcare industry, and we would be living our life. We would not be disabled and sick, and we wouldn't even, yes, obviously when we get older, we're more infested with them, and we still need the care homes, but the young people should not be in the care homes for sure, and that would keep them out. So there's a Facebook group. All right. How can I tell if I have any kind of parasitic worms? I'll answer your question, Ernie, in a second. So just my own personal opinion, be really careful with that copper protocol. I have been in this health industry for 35 years. I've seen so many things coming and going. And I've seen the colloidal silver come and go, the methylene blue. And yes, they can, even marijuana is another one. And certain things, they do have antimicrobial properties, but is it going to be enough that it's going to get you to where you want to be? What are the long-term problems? Could it build up in your body? How hard is it to get out of your body? That's really important, because we all need small amounts of copper. We all need small amounts of different minerals and different elements. But when we have too much of it, then it becomes a problem. And how easy is it to get it out? Very often, our body will move things into the central nervous system, and that's a lot harder to remove out of our body. And then we're dealing with another toxin. All right, so Ernie, how can I tell if I have any kind of parasitic worms? You have PPMS. I just go onto our website, livediseasefree.com, and or do a Google search of parasite symptoms and live disease free, and you'll find a blog post that I did with a little video. There are some very, very characteristic symptoms of parasites. So it would affect your cognitive function. So brain fog, a lot of things we have when we have MS. So brain fog, it can affect our mood, depression, anxiety. It can affect our energy, great fatigue, also our mobility and our gut health. So we might have constipation or diarrhea or a combination of both, stomach pain, gas, bloating. There are so many symptoms. Virtually any symptom we're dealing with could be caused by a parasite. And I believe through the research, what it's showing is that parasites are in all of us to some degree. And it's just the amount, the population, how much we have inside of us. If it's too much, then we're going to notice more and more symptoms, and then we end up with a chronic disease label. And different parasites like to live in different parts of the body. So that's why we'll have different diseases. Some like the reproductive organs more, some like our eyes, some like our joints. And so all disease, in my humble opinion, is caused by infections by parasites in the body. So how can I prove that if I have, assuming I do? We don't have good tests. The best parasitologists right now are saying that they can pick up about 10% of the parasites that we have. So it's not even worth it. So if a stool test is covered, you can have it done, but it's not going to show the bulk of the parasites that are causing your symptoms. That's just where we are at today. So the way that we do decide, so in the Live Disease Free plan, I'll just quickly go over the steps. Number one is we decrease our carbs because, as I've shared in previous articles, that their favorite source of energy is carbohydrates, so sugars and carbs. So decreasing the carbs enough makes you feel a lot better. The second step is to support your body, making sure you're having daily bowel movements, you're sleeping well at night, supporting the body, like looking at your physiology, your blood work. Maybe you need to support your iron or your thyroid, your vitamin D, etc. So we're making the parasites less active and we're supporting the body. So we're going to feel a lot better before we start treating. And then we build the game plan for treating. And how we do that is we look at your health history, the health history of your parents, your symptoms. There are very specific symptoms for different types of infections, of different types of parasites. We look at your diagnoses and we look at your energy test results. So if you go to a practitioner like a chiropractor that does applied kinesiology or a naturopath that does some type of muscle testing, they are able, instead of trying to figure out which parasites you have, they're able to tell which treatments test well for you. So if there's, 2 or 3 treatments that really test well for you that treat roundworms, then you probably have roundworms. If there's a treatment or 2 that test well for you that treat tapeworms, then you probably are dealing with tapeworms or flukes, etc. So that's how we kind of decide which are the treatments. You can have the stool test. There's GI map, there's comprehensive stool analysis, there's all kinds of different testing, but I personally tell my students not to waste their money because it just doesn't give them enough information. And so we base our treatment plan on the 5 criteria that I just mentioned. And it's really interesting. So you're dealing with PPMS, and there is another article that I did on a blog post article. You can just do a Google search of PPMS, hydroxychloroquine, and Live Disease Free. And then you can look at the study that I talked about, where they found that giving people that have MS, giving them hydroxychloroquine was able to slow down. They were able to significantly improve the decrease the progression of the disease. And that was with hydroxychloroquine. So, and that is a malaria drug. So there are so many, and if you look, I have a playlist, or not a playlist, but a group of, if you just do malaria and Live Disease Free, you'll find probably like a 6-part series that I did about MS and malaria. It's truly profound when you see the connections. And again, malaria or babesia, it could be one or the other. So unfortunately, I would say that is why we're not treating parasites, because our doctors don't have good tests. And then they've also been told that we don't have parasites in developed countries. We don't have a parasitic problem. That, yeah, there's a few in the environment, but they don't bother us. It's like, yeah, they bother us a lot. So ultrasound imaging, checking for metastasis and calcification of lymph nodes, level 2 post glands, especially in the case of lymphatic filariasis. Yes. So those could be some different tests to look for those little tiny roundworms in the central nervous system or in the lymph nodes. But if you're in a country like Canada, I don't think you'll ever get that test done. Like, it depends where you live, how much money you want to spend. If what we do is we just say, if you have a lot of symptoms of, you've been energy tested, you test well for these parasite drugs, you've got this condition that very commonly has microfilaria or roundworms. So a lot of the the treatments that will treat filarial worms will also be treating other roundworms also. So there's some overlap there. So like a roundworm medication might treat roundworms and might be helpful against some tapeworms and some flukes. So there's a synergistic effect, a better killing effect when you combine certain medications. And we've learned a lot about that over the years. Hi, James. So unfortunately, a lot of this testing is really hard. Like in Canada, tafenoquine is one of the newer drugs for treating babesia and malaria. And we would only get that if, number one, we could convince our doctor, we could get proper testing. It would show up on the test, which it doesn't always show up on the test. And then we have to get special permission from Health Canada for the doctor to be able to use it. That's how tightly it's regulated. And I haven't even checked into tafenoquine, but years ago I looked into ivermectin in Canada. It was not even available years before COVID. And so I called Health Canada and I said, so why is ivermectin not available in Canada? Is this because it's a dangerous drug? And they said, no, it's probably just the companies that are making it. They don't feel there's a market here for it. And I'm just like, we're giving lots to our animals in Canada, but we don't get these parasites right. So if we knew the half of it, it would just be awful. So Juanita, have red blood cell blisters on torso. What is it? It could be babesia, especially if you have MS. They do cause those little, it's not petechiae, it's something different. It has a special name. It will be on the babesia resource page I have on Live Disease Free. Is there a chance of measles virus as a constraint promoting the autoimmune diseases? Well, viruses in general, like I didn't mention too, that another thing that can suppress our immune system is maybe a bad vaccine that we had in the past. So there's something called a retrovirus, which can cause immune suppression, and that could make us more susceptible even to the worms and then to the Lyme disease, et cetera. So that is another possibility. But generally, what we have found is when you treat the big worms and then you treat the smaller parasites, that if a virus was active, your immune system will deal with it then. It might be different for retroviruses. You might have to treat them a little bit. There's some different natural things you can use for that. But I don't think the measles virus would be an issue with multiple sclerosis or autoimmune diseases. I know that they're trying to prove that Epstein-Barr virus would be an issue because they want to create vaccines. But if 96% of the population has Epstein-Barr, test positive for Epstein-Barr, then I don't think that is a cause of multiple sclerosis, because otherwise a great number of the population would have MS also. There are also pathogens present within that spread. Yeah, there are parasites in the big worms, right? So just one example, Dr. Alan McDonald found the filarial worms in the central nervous system of every MS subject he tested, and they were loaded with the genetic material DNA of Borrelia, which is Lyme. So these parasitic worms, they do carry their own parasites, and that's why, over time they're releasing bacteria and other smaller parasites into us. Ehrlichia is another one. I don't know, maybe babesia comes in that way too. I do know that for sure through biting insects, but we didn't know about the Borrelia, that it would come in through worms also. So these worms, they do carry a lot of different parasites of their own, smaller parasites, but parasites. It's just awful. Para Wellness Research Center for accurate testing. Again, from what I know, I'm pretty sure that we've used them. I'm thinking that we have used them, and if it is the same, there was a retired parasitologist, really great, I'm sure, doctor. And so one of our students sent it in, not very expensive. It was years ago, a couple $100, sent in a sample. And he's like, nope, came back, no worms. And then the day she got the results back, she was doing ozone rectal encephalation back then. And she passed this really big worm, and she put it in a jar and sent it back to him. And I think it was a whipworm. And she was a really sick lady at the start of the treatment. So that's the problem, is that even the very, very best parasitologists, they're missing most of them right now, which is, even if you do a DNA test, even if the DNA is in their system of all of these different parasites, they're using such a small sample that if the DNA is not present in their small sample that they're taking and looking, they're not going to find it. And so that is the problem. And if the doctors don't have a good test, if they don't know how to identify, like with symptoms, etc., if they're forbidden in some countries like Canada, they can't even treat parasites. Like if you get a positive stool test with a basic medication, like something over the counter, like Combantrin, they'll do, but they'll just send you off to a parasitologist. And my dad went to one a couple of years ago, and he's like, yeah, you probably have parasites, but they're kind of hard to treat. And you're in your 80s, there's probably no point in doing it. And that is why my dad is in a care home right now, because he was so healthy every which way, his heart, his brain, his whole body, no medication. He just had terrible gut issues for years, diarrhea, constipation, alternating. He had parasites, and that's why he is in the care home earlier. We kept him home as long as we could, but there comes a point where we're just physically not able to carry him and take care of him like we would like to. So that's what we're dealing with in Canada, and it's just brutal. It's just awful. And I'm sure a lot of countries are like that also. It is absolute suffering. Okay, just a couple more things here. Oh, let me go on to some successes. There's a lot of comments. Go ahead and type your questions or your comments. We will answer them later, but I just wanted to share some updates because this is the possibility for you. And I just want you to have some hope, because there are people that are sicker than you and people that are not as sick as you that are recovering. And I hope that this gives you hope. So one of my students, so we just had our call yesterday. So she's been taking the first 2 parasite medications. And she said, happily, I've been passing worms. She said, I'm getting stronger from the diet, from the Live Disease-Free diet plan, and also from treating these infections. I am recovering from years of trying to get better. But this program that you're offering is working better than anything I've tried before. So some examples she shared of improved strength. She said, I can walk up the stairs in a normal fashion now, instead of stepping up one foot and meeting it on the same step with my other foot. Perhaps I will be able to jaunt up the stairs at some point. When I started your program, I could barely do enemas laying on my side, and now I can do them properly. I used to retain water so much that when I was laying down with my feet up, so with her feet up, she would have to run to the toilet because she was releasing liquid. Now I'm not experiencing that terrible event. The woman that does circulation massage twice a month commented that my legs aren't swollen now. So these parasites cause edema also. She said, I'm able to walk down the hill to get the mail and back home with no problems now. 2 months ago, I was unsteady on my feet. So she's literally just done maybe a week at this point of starting with 2 parasite drugs. So a lot of her symptom improvements came with the Live Disease-Free diet, by following that, by preparing. That's what we want to see before you start treating. And now she's starting to pass the worms and seeing with her own eyes. And she said, I know I'm healing and I'm improving. I was able to attend church today. It was only the 2nd time in over a year. I'm getting stronger. Sending you a picture of the steps I navigated to get there. I really did walk up all those stairs and back down again, honest. So she sent me this picture, and there was like this huge flight of stairs that she walked up and down. And she said, thank you for your guidance and for the benefit of your expertise. The next student is a healthcare professional, and she is pretty much symptom-free. Like she's reported yesterday or on our call, I have been feeling really well, and I don't have any symptoms to report at this time, recovering from multiple sclerosis. Awesome. And then another student who's really new, and she's super sensitive to everything. And again, that's another thing. If you just react to everything, I know that that malaria and babesia, they cause us to have huge Herx reactions. Probably Lyme disease can also, but it is one of the characteristics. So if you have like 10 characteristic symptoms of babesia or malaria, one of those two, and then you also have the blood work and etc., then you probably do have one of those and you don't have to try to get a test. You can, but um, there you'll see that actually you can try, but they're not 100% accurate. That's the problem. Be prepared that you might not get a test result when you have the infection. So this student shared, overall, I'm sleeping better. And she said, once I fall asleep now, I get into a really deep sleep and I sleep. Even if I wake up, I'm able to go back to sleep. This is a grand gain. So this is a huge improvement for her because a lot of us were so sleep deprived, and that really affects our immune function also. She said, my skin has dramatically improved. She had rashes, and she said that now on her face, her legs, her arms, and her chest, it's mostly cleared up. And on her belly, it's about half as much of the outbreaks, and her back is lessening also. She said, I feel like I'm getting better, stronger, more clear-headed overall. The core of my being is lighting up. How amazing. And she said, I am prepared to do whatever it takes, even if I have never before been able to take treatments. She couldn't tolerate, like she can't even tolerate raw garlic. That's how sensitive she is. But we will help her. But she's come this far already. Somehow, she said, I know the path that is open for me to do what is needed, even though I'll have to go slowly and surely. Absolutely. And then another student who did not have multiple sclerosis, but he had really scary neurological symptoms. He knew he was going to end up with some kind of a disease label, and he did not want to go down that path. And so he has been improving and improving all the way. He's done several treatment cycles. He's really responded well to the treatments, passed a lot of worms. The foot bath has really helped him a lot for removing toxins and heavy metals. And also he has been doing some of the malaria type, babesia type treatments, and that's been helping also. And I just wanted to go down to his updates, his successes. I seem as though I'm getting better and stronger with each treatment cycle, and I'm getting regular sleep, managing life stressors. He's also had, this is life, right? Sometimes we have terrible family tragedies at times, and he's maneuvered that. So it's just awesome. When you really support your body and you decrease the parasitic load, you can handle the stresses in life, which is so awesome. So right now he's been using more of the herbs for treating Lyme disease, and he's finding that, he says, I feel really good. And again, the foot baths were really helping him. And not everyone noticed. And that's the thing, is that we all don't have exactly the same improvements with different things, but as long as he keeps improving, and he has some stuff in his head, like infection in his head, and he's finding that some of the herbs are really helping, and some of them are definitely babesia or malaria type herbs. So again, we do like herbs, and they are more helpful for some of the smaller parasites. The bigger ones are definitely more challenging with just herbs. And then another student shared, a brand new student, very recently, she's just getting ready to treat. So she's in the prep phase. I'm having more good days. I'm doing so much more. It is a very full body experience, which is a weird sentence, but it is the perfect sentence on how I am experiencing life this past week. I'm starting to do things that I have been wishing that I could do, and I'm feeling it in my whole body. I'm realizing just how sick I have been, and it's because I'm coming out of this incredible thick haze that I've been in for many years. What a beautiful thing. Oh my gosh, brings tears to my eyes. And then another student shared, so she is been treating, she's on the break week. She's like, we will treat like the bigger worms, and the protozoa, and then we will treat fungus for like the bigger worms for about 14 days, and then the fungus for about 10 days, and then we'll take a break week. But during the break week, if people have more symptoms of the Lyme infections, then they'll use herbs and the oxygen therapies for that. Or if they have more of the mold and yeast, then they'll use more herbs and oxygen for that. And improvements is that her energy is improving, and she's able to change to change and to make her bed, to take a 20-minute walk, then weed the garden for 10 minutes, eat breakfast, make it to church on time, 2 loads of laundry before church also. And of course, I rested for the rest of the day. Indeed, my energy is up. I mean, just to be able to do our responsibilities, just to be able to go to work, just to be able to go shopping after work instead of crawling into bed. I remember one of our students saying that. It's just amazing. And another one that's in Europe, let me just see here. Today, my partner noticed that I'm able to walk more quickly when he helped me across the street. That's awesome. And then another student shared, my symptom improvements over the course of my recovery strictly drop the, no, let me just say here. My symptom improvements over the course of my recovery strictly from the diet are, so my brain fog is free. I have less spasticity, less fatigue, improved strength, and I'm continuing to take a step when transferring multiple times a day. So he's just getting ready to treat. Amazing. All right. So there's so many more questions. We've gone over an hour. I think that's long enough. But anyhow, just type your questions in the question box. We will answer the questions. Our team will answer your questions. And if you are at the place where you're like, Pam, I've been following you for a while. I really believe I'm dealing with parasites. It makes so much sense. But you don't have the support of a healthcare professional, make sure to watch my masterclass training, even if you just want to know the steps, the system of the Live Disease-Free Plan, what we do to recover. Watch the masterclass training, watch my training, and then if you need support, make sure to fill out a form, book a time with me, and I will make sure to see if it's a good fit for you, the Live Disease-Free Plan. We would be honored to support you. And in this program, we help you so that you're going to be able to access all the treatments you need, any practitioners you need to work with, and just really helping you to play that active role so that you will treat effectively and recover from these parasites. And this can take place in weeks, months, not years. So with that, if you enjoy what I'm sharing with you, if all of this is helping you, if you want to help us to spread the word, please like, share, and subscribe. And then we will see you next week. Take care and bye-bye for now.